We're back again with another preview show. Myself and Harry Powell are here to break down the latest UFC installment. That's UFC in the Apex Center in Las Vegas. Harry, Ian, and Huxley in the background, if you're watching videos, are all here. We're looking forward to the fights. We're going to break it down. We were just talking, Harry, about this card. It's a good card with a lot of prospects, a lot of interesting matchups. Plus, there's only 12 fights on it too, so it's ticking off all the boxes, isn't it?
Really is. I mean, you said something there, and it was that for the longest time there was always just something to nitpick at with cards, whether it's the amount of fights, whether it's the main event, the co-main event, some placements, some this, some that, some of the next thing. In the last little while, we've had very, very little to complain about with UFC cards, and when we've got something to complain about, we absolutely fucking complain about it.
We do
our best to complain to the best of our ability. But I think it's really important on the same vein, and you do a great job of it. Shawnee does a great job of it. Spencer does a great job of it. All the boys do a great job of it. When there's something to praise the UFC for, we should absolutely praise them. And this fight card and the last string of fight cards that we've had have been absolutely fantastic. And I think that there are some really, really interesting matchups in this one. There are some great prospects. There are some really, really good, just straight matchups. There's some title jeopardy at the very, very main event. And as you say, there's fucking 12 fights. There's absolutely nothing that we can complain about here. Really good card on paper.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Sean Strickland versus Magomedov is the main event on Saturday night. Damir Ismagulov versus Grant Dawson. Really excited to see Grant Dawson back in there as well in the co-main event. Looking down through the card, Max Griffin versus Michael Morales, Ariana Lipski versus Melissa Gatto, Benoit St. Denis taking on Ismail Bonfim. A good fight. The return of Kevin Lee against Rinhat Fakhretdinov. That's another good fight as well. Yeah, we'll stay going down through the card. We'll talk about each and every one of those fights as we do. Let's stop on the main event. And I'm just going to say my piece here now. I hope that somebody goes in there and smashes Sean Strickland. I am sick and tired of listening to all the shit that comes out of his mouth before every single fight. It's absolutely, I'm just sick of it at this stage. Look, we're supposed to stay neutral here, but I hope Ismagulov comes in here and absolutely, I have my problems with Sean Strickland after the Alex Pereira fight and his stupid game plan at the time to want and stand and bang with the guy. I don't understand why we want to give this guy a platform, why we want to put a microphone in front of this guy's face, because he's not a good representative of mixed martial arts. All his opinions are trash and old school and just mock controversial just to create clicks. And I mean, is that the way you want to present yourself? I don't like it. With someone like Colby Covington, he says some crazy shit, but it's like flat out there a gimmick, because we hear other stories about Covington in the background being a generally nice guy. With Sean Strickland, I just think he's just plain dumb. And these are all of his ideologies. And everybody seems to want to lap it up. And I'm sick of it now at this stage, Harry. How about you?
Okay, so I'm going to try and come at this at a slightly more balanced perspective. I think in MMA, there is an understanding that for the most part, and I think this is changing slightly as the sport modernizes, as the sport grows, I think there has been a stereotype that people come to the sport in search of something. And for the longest time, it wasn't necessarily glory. It wasn't necessarily fame, fortune. For the most part, they were coming based on trauma, right? Childhood trauma, early lifehood trauma, whatever. I think Sean Strickland, from the little that we do know about his childhood, the little bit that he has spoken publicly about his childhood, is clearly been traumatic, clearly has left him in a situation where his views and his rhetoric are antiquated. And so whilst I completely agree with you about his personality, and it's not somebody I would be super favorable at going and sitting down in the pub with and having a couple of pints of Coke, it is a situation where the difficulty that the UFC have is that this is a man that has a single-digit ranking next to his name in the UFC middleweight division. He is somebody that, and I think this matchup is very telling, actually. It's that Sean Strickland is being given Abus Magomedov because the UFC would like Abus Magomedov to go in there and absolutely steamroll Sean Strickland so that they can push him towards a title shot. And there's vast, exciting new blood in that 185-pound division. We have to be able to separate who he is as a man and who he is as a fighter. And we'll do that shortly. But in the same vein, I agree with you that Colby Covington has run the risk at times of believing his gimmick, of believing his shtick. But because of the aggressive nature of it, because of the aggressive use of prop and outfit and flamboyant wording and phrasing and all this stuff, it's very evident to almost everyone that this is a gimmick. This is a game. This is a ploy. So much so that he's actually said this publicly, right? That the UFC were going to cut him because he wasn't exciting enough. And so he felt the need to create a character. Fine. That's a conversation for another day. If Sean Strickland as a human is not your portion, well, actually, that's exactly what the UFC want as well, right?
Yeah.
Because on Saturday night, you're going to tune in, and you're going to tune in wishing that Abus Magomedov makes it an 18-second finish rather than a 19-second finish. And that's the position we're in on Saturday night.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely not wrong. And I wouldn't even be targeting the UFC over my complaints. It just seems that we're seeing Sean Strickland every single week on the microphone. And it's a lot of nonsense. I just watched the recent video of the press conference where he was like talking about taking women out of the workforce again, just nonsense. And then I think the most poignant question and the most legit question that was asked to him at the media day today was by Oscar Willis, who asked him, has he ever sought therapy? And it might not be the worst idea. Let's get into the fight. We spoke about Abus Magomedov. He's been inserted. You've already explained, Harry. We're following the similar path here to Alex Pereira. In his rise up through the middleweight rankings, came in and had 1 or 2 wins before being ousted up into face a guy like Sean Strickland as well. And it's for the sole reason to inject a little bit of fresh blood, a bit of fresh competition into the top of the middleweight rankings. I don't hate the idea. I actually like the idea. How about you? Do you want to see this happening? Would you prefer to see a slower build for a guy like Abus Magomedov? What's your kind of opinion on this matchup without going into the technical details of styles that these both gentlemen are going to bring in here on Saturday night?
I really like it. I think I really like it, but all of those questions are entirely fighter and divisional dependent, right? If you're coming in at 135 pounds, going from an unranked fighter to one of the top 5 fighters is just unheard of. It's just not going to happen, right? There's far too many people in that division vying for fights like that you would have to do something insanely drastic for that to even be a question. In the same vein, a lot of the time, this is going to be dependent on age, right? Position in career and all of this sort of stuff. Well, Magomedov is 32 years of age. He's a significant portion of his way through his career. And so he comes in on his UFC debut with a really, really solid record and some really, really solid names on that record. And he absolutely stomps a dude. It's not even slightly competitive. The first shot he takes, he boots a fella's jaw all the way out the stadium. And we're sat there saying, okay, sir, sure. And it's performances like that in situations where Abus Magomedov is 32, he is in the situation he is in his career, and especially at 185 pounds, which is screaming out for fresh blood. We have the Dricus du Plessis. He is now coming through. He has a massive fight on his hands. We need the guys behind him that are going to push that division and start to flow through into a really healthy division. And I think this is something that we've all called for over the last little while, is an injection of excitement. Well, Jared Cannonier gave us that a couple of weekends ago when he absolutely decimates Marvin Vettori over 5 rounds. And okay, I understand Jared Cannonier isn't new blood, but he's gone and he's shown us something new. Well, Abus Magomedov came in and also showed us something new, but is also a new name and new blood in the division. So when that's the case, the UFC lose nothing in this matchup. If he goes in and it's a close back and forth fight for 5 rounds, well, you know exactly where he is. He's a top 5 fighter in that middleweight division. If he goes in and Sean Strickland runs him over and bulldozes him in 2 rounds, well, you know, okay, we pushed him too soon. Let's dial him back and try another name. If Abus Magomedov goes out there and stomps Sean Strickland in a round, he's a title contender immediately.
Yeah, and it's interesting that, you know, it's come to that, but we've talked time and time again about the middleweight division. And, you know, I think it's kind of a division in its own right where you could really see this happening in the trajectory of fighters like Alex Bahia and Abus Magomedov getting up there into these kind of fights quickly. And I mean, I'm here for it when it's a necessity. When it's not a necessity, like you said, yeah, I'm hit or miss on it. All 19 seconds of Magomed's debut, Harry, I mean, it must have took you so long to break it all down. What were some of the takeaways? And obviously we have some KSW fights and some PFL fights as well that we can look at. But what was your main takeaways from what you've seen when Magomedov went in there against Stolfus and put him away with a beautiful front kick and finished him off after just 19 seconds on his UFC debut? It was a debut to remember, and that's why he's found himself in this position right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to take much, right? And what I mean by that is we're talking about elite level MMA now. He's going in against Sean Strickland, who is a top 5 in his division, right? So for me, what I learned in that fight is his footwork was good. He forced Stolfus into a position where he had square hips. He then saw the strike he wanted to throw, had the confidence to throw it early, and then was able to have the execution to finish it. Now, as soon as he landed it, I think he knew it was pretty much over. And okay, there was a couple of coffin nails, whatever it is. Referee calls it off. Fantastic, no problem. But there are a couple of bare bones elements that I will just push to the side, and I'm asking to see them again at an elite level. Like I'm not disbanding, I'm not disproving, I'm not downplaying the performance against Dustin Stolfus, but Dustin Stolfus will never see a top 5 name against a top 5 ranking against his name, right? He's just not good enough as a fighter, and that's also fine.
Yeah.
So what we have to do is we have to go in with Abus Magomedov with a level of eager anticipation, eager excitement, but an awareness that this absolutely could all go wrong. But if you show me on your UFC debut that you have the precision, the footwork, the timing, the execution, and the confidence to go in and destroy a man in 19 seconds like that, you have my attention, young sir. You absolutely, young sir, he's 2 years older than me. But you have my attention, right? Because Sean Strickland is a man that can get hit, will get hit, is happy enough to get hit. And we also know from Abus Magomedov that he has a bit of the grappling in him as well. And so, okay, we didn't see it. We didn't have to see it in the debut. But the thing I'm interested the most is who is Abus Magomedov in this division, in this UFC division, in this portion of the UFC division. You mentioned before, he's fought guys that we know, and he's got good wins against guys that we know. But that's all relative to what happens right now on Saturday. If he goes out and he tries to push the finish and tries to replicate that 19 seconds, it's probably not going to go well for him, right? No. If he comes in and he says, look, I'm prepared for 5 rounds, and if the finish comes, I'm going to take it, of course, that's a very different prospect. But if I'm Abus Abus Nurmagomedov. Jesus fucking Christ.
You're starting to sound like me now. So yeah, what's going on here?
Russian lads, what am I doing?
I couldn't say Umar Nurmagomedov once, and it was the Umar that was throwing me off, not the Nurmagomedov, because like we've said that 1,000 times. It's crazy. Anyway, continue, please.
Fucking dropping the ball. If I'm Abus Magomedov, I think the thing that I'm most interested in here is the mentality for him coming in, not just his second UFC performance, but the gravity of this opponent. Because he should know, and I'm sure he does know, that if he goes in and he beats Sean Strickland, however he beats him, there is a big, big, big next fight. Whether it's a Robert Whittaker or a Dricus du Plessis, whether it's a Marvin Vettori, whether it's a Jared Cannonier, whether it's an Israel Adesanya, whether it's an Alex Bahia if he decides to come back down, that is an insane trajectory to rise on, from Dustin Stolfus to Sean Strickland to then big motherfucking monster at middleweight, and then potentially even the big boss, the big end boss, and that's Israel Adesanya. Like, whilst I don't think that will happen in actuality, right?
It's not beyond the realms of possibility that he goes in there and knocks the head off of Strickland and then calls out Israel, who, like, we talked about the UFC wanting to do this and why, because the division is weak, but also because Israel Adesanya needs some fresh blood to challenge for his title as well. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, if he did produce a stunning knockout, got on the mic and calls out Israel, I'd be interested to see what would happen next, because all the talk is, you know, Israel wanting du Plessis to beat Whittaker and then that'll be the next fight. Well, that's only have to go out and beat Robert Whittaker. Like, I mean, yeah, take that for what you will. But I mean, this one is interesting, and look, to maybe concentrate a little bit on Sean Strickland, where, you know, I was critical of the start, but we have to give him credit for being the guy who always accepts challenges like this, because at the end of the day, it's his ranking, it's his position in the ranking that's up for grabs here, and he's more than willing to kind of go in and fight these guys, and he did the same with Alex Bahia as well. And there's not too many like him like that when it comes to competitive nature of what he likes to do with his career. So I'd have to give him all the credit in the world here. But Harry, for him, this is just as important. He hasn't passed this kind of a test in a while, where he's put himself on a little bit of a run to put himself in title contention. And even him, he could go out there and produce the goods here on Saturday night and call out Israel, and he may find himself, you know, coming off a win, and a good win over Nasruddin Imamov, another win here. I feel he needs a finish, and he doesn't really have too many finishes in him. But you never know. Anything could happen. But it's like there's plenty of things on the table here when it comes to Sean Sheehan, Harry, and winning this fight. So it's just as important for him as it is for Magomedov as well.
Yeah, I mean, for Sean Strickland, right? Like, he is, in my opinion, the guy that beats everyone that's not elite, right? Like, Nasruddin Imamov might become elite at some point, but is not elite right now. There's too many holes in the game, and we've seen them exposed. We saw them exposed against Sean Strickland. We've seen them exposed against Chris Curtis, right? Like, they are evident to see. And this is why I like the matchup with Magomedov so much, is it's very much we're going to fucking find out. If there are holes in Magomedov's game, Sean Strickland will absolutely show them to him. If Magomedov is elite, we are going to find out. And I think for Sean Strickland, he is comfortable now in that position, because when he had the big chance, the Alex Bahia fight, right? The rhetoric was, all you have to do is just grapple. All you have to do is just take him down, navigate away from the massive left hook and the big right hand. He did neither. And I think some of that was Sean Strickland self-sabotaging, right? I think some of that was being far too driven by his own ego and wanting to stand and wanting to prove a point. And some of it, I think, was just that he's not that smart, right? If we are looking at this fight, he has gone out, and I think I actually slightly disagree with what you're saying, is he's beaten the guys in and around this level, unless, like you said, they're elite, right? So if he goes out here, he has to be thinking about this as this guy doesn't deserve to be in the cage with me. This guy's gone out and beaten an absolute fucking shithouse in Stolfus in his first one, and now they're putting him in here with me. Like, I'm absolutely going to go out there and put a beating on this dude, and I'm going to talk to him for the whole time it lasts, and I'm going to tell him exactly how much he does not deserve to be in here with me. And then he goes out and he says, give me a Jared Cannonier again, or give me an Izzy, or you think Dricus du Plessis, Robert Whittaker's the fight, I'm the fucking fight. You're the guy that needs me, blah, 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 blah. I also think for Sean Strickland, it's really important that he gets a win here to just build himself back up and cement his ranking. Because as you say, it feels to me that the UFC is trying to pigeonhole Sean Strickland as the next guy that tests everyone else, right? They're trying to pigeonhole him into the Neil Magny, right? Which means they don't really give a shit about his divisional ranking. It can be anything from 3 to 15. They're going to chuck you in there with the guy that's coming up to see whether he's worthy of the next crop. If Sean Strickland goes out and wins here and looks good doing so, he can repel some of that pressure from the UFC because he's going to keep himself relevant in the title contention. If that's something he wants by title contention, I mean, then he has to go out and win here. If he doesn't want that and he wants to be happy enough to roll over, go in, get a show bonus, do whatever, we could be looking at a very different result. But I think we have to believe that Sean Strickland, like 99.9% of fighters, goes into every single fight wanting to put on the performance of their lifetime.
Absolutely. And that's what I expect to see on Saturday night. It'll be interesting to see who can live up to the test. If Strickland has been fighting down for quite some time, so he's got to be looking ahead if he gets a win here. And obviously Magomedov can undo all of his hard work through the years if he goes out there and gets a win in the main event. Let's move on to the co-main event, and we shall talk about Denis Ismagulov versus Grant Dawson. Grant Dawson low-key is coming up through the lightweight rankings with an impressive win streak. Is only 19-1-1, 7-0-1 in the UFC, with undefeated so far in his UFC tenure, coming in against a tough Ismagulov, who's coming off a loss over Arman Tsarukyan, which is, I mean, yeah, that happens. It happens. Ismagulov is a fantastic test for Dawson here. But my question to you is, bar our good buddy E. Spencer Kite, why is nobody talking about Grant Dawson? Why is he flying under the radar so much? And is this his opportunity to come out and have your kind of come out performance per se, and to get all the fans watching, all the fans talking? It's a real, real good opportunity.
So to me, and I might sound a bit like Spencer here, but to me, this is one of two fights on this card that I genuinely cannot fucking wait for. I really, really can't wait for. This, to me, Shawnee and I were having a conversation about this fight today, and we were saying, Shawnee was asking me what's my thoughts on the analysis of this. And my answer is I really just don't know. Like, I think that, and I'm going to go around the houses to get back to your point, I promise. I think Denis Ismagulov is the more up and down technical fighter, in that his footwork is cleaner, it's crisper, his jab is really good, his generic grappling, his overarching conceptual grappling is far superior. But Grant Dawson can do just as much of the everything, and he's got that added athleticism. He's got that added pop. He's got a bit more power than Denis Ismagulov. He's got a bit more intensity than Denis Ismagulov. And so for me, I think one of the reasons why people don't know Grant Dawson is, and this is not Grant Dawson's fault at all, but it's just a bit of the strength of schedule. You know, like, let's just quickly run through the fights that he's had. So he goes and beats Mark Madsen. Well, Mark Madsen's generally buried on European cards, right? He's gone and beat Jared Gordon. Well, Jared Gordon's only sort of risen to fame recently because of the Paddy Pimblett fight. Fine. He goes and has a performance against Ricky Glenn. You don't know who Ricky Glenn is unless you're following intently. Leonardo Santos is a fantastic win, but again, if you don't know who that is, that's a tough fight. Tough fight to understand, sorry. Derek Minner, again, you don't know who that is, right? Adrian Diaz, you don't know who that is. Julian Erosa, people know who that is. That's fine. And then you have Nad Narimani. Like, again, if you didn't follow European MMA, you didn't follow Cage Warriors, you've got no idea who Nad Narimani is, right?
Yeah, and one could argue even with this fight with Ismagulov, where it's a guy coming off a loss and a relatively unknown as well. So I don't think the UFC are doing him any favors here. And look, I think they're doing him a favor in regards putting him in there with a good, solid test, one of the toughest guys he's probably faced in his career so far, in Ismagulov. But I feel that, like the Saryukin win the last time, I feel if Grant Dawson does get this done, that he probably won't get his due as much as he should for beating a guy. He will from me and you and for anyone who's paying attention, but not maybe from the mass majority of people who are going to be watching.
So I actually think this is I have a slightly different opinion. I just think that this is absolutely fantastic matchmaking from the UFC and fantastic card placement too. Because we're going to run through a screamer of a fight just before in Lipski and Gatto, and you're going to come on in here and you're going to see pretty high level MMA. And I think the UFC are absolutely aware of how good Damir Ismagulov is. And the question for Damir Ismagulov from the UFC side is, everyone loses to Arman Tsarukyan unless you're Islam Makhachev and Mateusz Gamrot, supposedly. Like, that's fine. Show me, are you ready to go right back in with an elite level competitor, going out and beating Grant Dawson, stopping the 7-fight win streak, 8-fight win streak with a draw? Like, are you that guy? Are you the guy that we think you are? Because you're getting on in your career as well. The age isn't on your side. And so let's see whether you're ready for a big push in the next one. Maybe it's not going to be an Arman Tsarukyan, but maybe it's a enter name X, whatever.
Yeah.
Right?
No.
Grant Dawson. Go on, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
For Grant Dawson, this is don't worry about the fans knowing who you are. We know. And if you go out there in a co-main event on a fight night card, and let me say again, this is an absolutely perfect use of a co-main event slot on a fight night card by the UFC. You've got two fantastic fighters going in and offering their skills. We can say whatever we want about Sean Strickland. I have no problem with the main event either. He's a name, and they're looking to build another name from him. Fine, no problem. Main event slot, absolutely fine. This co-main event is exactly where it should be. It's going to get the media attention. People are going to listen to Grant Dawson. He's going to be at the press conference. When they talk about it on the comms, there's going to be conversations about him. He's going to be beamed. There's going to be extra time used to promote him and Damir Ismagulov. There'll be VTs on it. There'll be the whole 9 yards. And if he goes out and beats Damir Ismagulov, I don't think it matters whether people know the level of Damir Ismagulov or not, because the UFC will.
Yeah, very, very solid point there. And, you know, you mentioned you were talking to Sean about the ins and outs of this fight. And this, I agree with you. And you're talking about this from an analytical perspective. This is such a close and well-matched fight. I mean, it's very hard. It's going to go down to the finest of intricacies on the night, I feel, Harry, when both of these gentlemen enter and the cage door closes. What are some of the positives and negatives from both of these gentlemen that they can kind of capitalize on? And who do you fancy, maybe, without, I know you don't like giving picks, but who's your early thoughts when you look at both of these guys and kind of see how they match up with each other? How do you see a fight going?
So I think that the biggest thing for me is going to be strategy. That's the biggest thing, right? Grant Dawson is going to need to be able to disrupt the rhythm of Damir Ismagulov, because if Damir gets working, he's going to be able to use the jab, to use the footwork, and to mix in some of the grappling and push Grant Dawson on the back foot. That's the problem. So Grant Dawson is going to need to be able to pick his spots, to implement his own grappling, to implement his own striking, which is more damage-based, which is going to heavily favor on the judges' scorecards, but isn't necessarily as clean, as pretty, and as beautiful as Damir Ismagulov's is. I don't think that matters in the slightest. And I think in some way that could lean to the advantage of Grant Dawson. And I'm going to harken back a little bit to a fight that we talked about last week, which is Ilia Topuria and Josh Emmett. Now, I'm not saying in any way, stretch of the imagination, that Damir Ismagulov and Grant Dawson are of similar levels. I don't think that at all. But I think to my point here is Grant Dawson is like Josh Emmett V3, right? Because he's got some of the excellent high vaulting elite level stuff, but he's also a big hitter. And what we saw in the Ilir Topuria fight is when Emmett picked his moments, he was able to catch and draw Ilir Topuria into the pocket. Now, Topuria made adjustments, and that's fine. But I think Grant Dawson's going to need to use those moments, facilitate and manufacture those moments for himself, and land damage on Denis Ismagulov. I think he's going to need to offensively wrestle, and offensively wrestle aggressively, if nothing more than to make sure Denis Ismagulov adjusts his range, adjusts his timing, and adjusts his reads for those competencies. If that happens, Grant Dawson is going to find far more time for him to take steps into the pocket, land heavily on Denis Ismagulov. I think Grant Dawson attacks the body early and should do. And we've seen that he has an absolutely potent submission threat as and when he gets to good positions. There are going to be scrambles in this matchup. And the one, whilst I don't usually do this, and this could bite me on my face, I always generally favor the guy that's more technical in those scrambles. But I think, I think absolutely not. I think it's Denis Ismagulov. But I think that the athleticism of Grant Dawson, along with his scramble ability, is going to cause Denis Ismagulov problems. I could be very, very wrong. I just have a feeling that when we get to those grappling exchanges, Grant Dawson is going to win those scrambles.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting matchup here, and I'm very excited to see it. And, you know, we continue on with good matchups as well, and that's Max Griffin and Michael Morales in the lightweight division, no, welterweight division, excuse me. Yeah, and this is another fantastic matchup here as well. Obviously, Max Griffin is coming off of his Legends Tour, picking up wins over Carlos Condit and Tim Means, and dropping a loss to Neil Magny in between. He gets some young, fresh blood in the welterweight division. Michael Morales coming off his win over Adam Fuja, a guy that we've talked about time and time again. Look, we talked about both these guys. I think Max Griffin has been on a tremendous vein of form, and look he lost to Neil Magny. These things happen. Neil Magny is picking up wins left, right, and center. And I like the UFC have kind of inserted him in this matchup for his sake, and also for Michael Morales' sake here as well, because this is a good, significant jump up in a challenge for Morales here, Harry. Would you agree?
I mean, this is a we're going to find out test, right? All markers lead to Michael Morales blowing Max Griffin out of the water here. Max Griffin is 37. He's coming to the tail end of his career. Not a massive hitter. Is hittable. Is going to be way slower than Michael Morales. We have seen that Michael Morales looks like a superior athlete. All roads lead towards Michael Morales going in and doing the things. But what we've seen from Michael Morales is sometimes some questionable decision making. We've sometimes seen that he hasn't stick to a game plan in the same way that his coaches maybe want him to. Sometimes we've seen that he is hittable and he can end up in bad spots. This is, again, perfect matchmaking by the UFC for a guy like Michael Morales. He goes in on a prominent space on a main card, and we get to see the veteran test. And that is an absolute bona fide necessity for any prospect coming through in any division, is the veteran test. And we're going to learn a ton about Michael Morales in this one, because Max Griffin at this point in his career can do everything, has seen all the positions before, has been in all of the positions before. He's picked up tough losses to Neil Magny. He's gone out and smashed Tim Means to pieces. And we're in a situation now where he's coming to the end of his career and he's facilitating the next era through. If Michael Morales is destined for a top 15 place, he beats Max Griffin. If he does not, we have to rethink what our ceiling is of Michael Morales at this point in his career.
Oh,
he's
100%,
young.
yeah.
Obviously,
he's only 24 years of age. So, if it's a failure here, it's not the end of the world for Michael Morales, but definitely a good test in Max Griffin. Okay, you said things about Morales there, makes poor decisions and time to time. Fight IQ might not all be there. You know, things that you would expect to see from a 24-year-old fighter. What are some of the things that you see that you normally wouldn't expect to see from a fighter of 24? Because there are lots of good things in his game as well.
The thing I like about Michael Morales is twofold. The first is that he's long and he knows how to use it. And that maybe if I was to build a fighter, right? And this is one of the reasons why John Jones is as special as he is to me, is I would build a fighter with a long reach, like a Randy Brown, like a Neil Magny, like a Jack Della Maddalena, like a John Jones, and that they know how to use it. And at 24 years of age, for Michael Morales to have understood, and there's work to do, but for him to have understood to the degree that he has how to use that range, that's special to me. That's interesting to me. That's rare to me. The other side of that is he just doesn't quite yet know how to lose. And that is also interesting to me. There were shaky moments in the Adam Fugic fight. There were shaky moments in the Trevin Giles fight. There were moments when you're like, oh, okay, against better competition, that gets punished. And it was being punished. And he's like, yeah, it's fine. Don't worry about it. I'm just going to knock him out soon. And then he does. That to me is, again, very interesting, because you can go out, and we talk about Ian Gary. Ian Gary against Song Kenan. What happened? Made a mistake, got punished, and he was like, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. I got this. I'm just going to turn the gears up now. And now I'm going to go out and finish him. And I think even in the first couple of performances for Ian Gary, there were a couple of question marks, right? Just didn't really feel like he was getting out of the gears that we've seen him in previous performances. Didn't really feel like he was showing the things that we'd seen before. And now, as he's coming into a rich vein of form, as he's dealt with a couple of those punishing positions and punishing mistakes, he goes out and he does the thing. Michael Morales, 24 years old, is on a similar path of making mistakes, being shown them, but still managing to win fights. And that's the really exciting thing.
If you're Max Griffin here and you're coming in against this young, hungry, aggressive power puncher, he needs to be very careful of falling into that trap of a tit-for-tat striking battle, I feel. I think what a Max Griffin fight looks like to me against Michael Morales is you're closing the distance safely, you're getting him backed up against the cage, you're grappling early, you're getting the blood rushing to his arms early, you're making him ask some questions, you're putting him in uncomfortable positions. It might not look the prettiest, it might not look the friendliest to anybody who's watching on, but I mean, I'm of the opinion it's better to win ugly than to not win at all. Would you be telling that to Max Griffin if you're coming in here? Obviously easier said than done, or what would you expect to see from him?
1 bajillion%. That's what I'm telling him if I'm in his corner. I am saying that you have to go and you have to veteran him. You're not quicker. You're probably maybe stronger with, all the 37-year-old adult bones in you and everything else, fine. But we're not quicker. We're not as athletic. And he's got that reach. And so let us go out there and we'll throw a couple of leg kicks and we'll pump a couple of jabs out there. And as soon as he starts to think that he's getting a rich vein of rhythm, we're going to just drive him against the fence and we're going to make it dirty. And I'm going to drive my head into his chin and I'm going to look to beat up his body a little bit. I'm going to stamp on his feet. I'm going to make sure I'm digging those underhooks really high. I'm making sure I'm pulling the hips. I'm making sure I'm driving into him. I'm chucking his posts over. I'm making sure I'm just making this as uncomfortable and as annoying and frustrating as possible for Michael Morales. Because when those arms start to fill, we're going to ask questions of his mentality. We're going to ask questions as to whether those performance dips, those questionable decisions are repetitive and commonplace, or whether those are fixed. And this is exactly the reason why we like the fight, right? Max Griffin can go out, has the tools to go out, has the ability to go out and put Michael Morales in those positions to ask those questions.
Absolutely. I'm fascinated to see how he handles it. And we shall move on to the women's flyweight division. Ariana Lipski versus Melissa Gatto. Not yeah, was that a move on? Was that a move on, or was that a wipe of the brow? It was a wipe of the brow. Hey, you could. Hey, you have to be at risk when you're throwing that arm up in the air here, because if we got to move on, I can't. I have to follow your lead here, sir. If you're telling me to move on, I'll move on. I'm only joking. Some Brazil crime in the women's 125-pound division, and look at, we were all but going to throw the book out on Ariane Lipski, and she goes in there against the always durable, always tough JJ Aldrich and picks up a win in her last fight. Melissa Gatto came in, was unfortunate enough not to take the win over Tracy Cortez. She dropped the decision there. So it's all to fight for in the kind of established position in what is a talent-rich 125-pound division right now, Harry. Who do you feel is going to get the upper hand, and how do you feel both these women match up against one another? It's a tough one. This is a tough one. But I feel with Lipski, sometimes she turns up and sometimes she doesn't turn up. And when she turns up, she can be a nightmare for anyone. And it seems that the fighter that we had with her over at KSW before she moved over to the UFC, we didn't get to see that, or we've only got to see that in short spells. And look, she went in there and she's passed the test against JJ Aldrich in her last fight, but I'm curious to see if she can keep it going, because she needs to build up and mount a little bit of a run there, because as I said, there is loads and loads of women looking to try and crack those rankings in the 125-pound division right now. What's your overall all thoughts on this fight?
I really like this fight based on Melissa Gatto. To me, has had some horrific luck with fights being cancelled, and I think we've lost 1 or 2 years maybe of her career from fights being cancelled. Gillian Robertson cancelled, Maria Agapova cancelled, Avia cancelled, Tanita Bernardo cancelled. Just the list goes on and on and on and on and on, right? However, I do feel like she's still, and maybe this is harsh to say, as you know, maybe this is a reach to say, sorry, at 27, but I think she's still a bit of a prospect. You don't go out and you don't land the body kicks you do on Sijara Eubanks and put her away. Sijara Eubanks is a tough out, right? A tough out,
very tough out. Yeah, 100% agree.
You don't then go out and destroy Victoria Leonardo the way you do. Carol Hosa is a very, very solid fighter in this division, and you go out and you sub her in a round. I've got no problems with that whatsoever. Now, Tracy Cortez, I think, is a very bright prospect in this division, and going out and losing to her is absolutely no shame whatsoever. So the Lipski battle is exactly what you said. It's a name for Melissa Gatto to go out, and if Lipski is on, it's a fantastic fight. It's a 50-50 fight. If Lipski is not on, Gatto goes out here and puts a beating on Ariane Lipski, 110%. And it's really hard for me to call the analytics of this fight, because I literally don't know which Ariane Lipski is going to turn up. It's very, very difficult.
It's so difficult. It's kind of a tune in and find out fight. But I tell you, we're going to tune into the next one, and that's Benoit Saint Denis versus Ismail Bonfim. And not alone are we going to tune in, Harry, we're going to sound the banger alert alarms for this one as well, because this one has fireworks written all over it. 2 power punchers, 2 finishers, 2 very, very exciting fighters. Saint Denis obviously came in and didn't have it all his own way at the start of his UFC career, has since picked up 2 wins, coming back off his knockout win over Gabriel Miranda, and obviously Ismail Bonfim picking up a very, very good win over Terence McKinney in his last fight. This is a really, really exciting fight in the lightweight division.
So, maybe a controversial opinion, and I'm going to argue with myself here for the next couple of minutes. My controversial opinion is I hate this fight, but but this is actually the other fight that I'm so excited to see. The reason why I hate this fight is because Benoit Saint Denis was on the end of the worst refereeing performance I have seen in modern UFC history. The gentleman that allowed him to take the amount of damage that he took against, how can I not remember? I'm going to have to pull up his topology record. I apologize, lads.
It's Alessio Zaleski, as I think the name you're looking for.
The amount of damage that he was allowed to take in that fight was absolutely heinous. It never, ever, ever should have gotten to where it got to, but here we are. Now, he took some time off, come back, 2 wins on the trot, fine. My issue with this is that I think Ismail Bonfim is the truth. In his debut, he was my spotlight the next day. And I just have a feeling that this lad and his brother are going to do some really, really interesting things in this division. Now, I think Ismail is likely the better of the two. The other Bonfim brother was Gabriel was a little bit too willing to jump on submissions and all these sorts of things. But the flying knee against Terence McKinney was set up, thrown, and landed absolutely expertly. You do not have that in your locker unless you are an elite fighter. And I think Terence McKinney is a very, very, very good fighter. He just needs a little bit of rounding off. And I think that win is only going to age better and better and better. And so here, the reason I don't like the matchup is Benoit Saint-Denis is absolutely there to be hit. And the one thing I loved about Bonfim was the timing on the shots, was the footwork, was all of the placement in his general striking arsenal. And it feels to me like that is a big test for Bonfim to try and overcome. For Benoit Saint-Denis to overcome.
Yeah.
However, Benoit Saint-Denis got that grappling, bro. He can do the grappling, and that's something we obviously haven't seen in Bonfim's UFC run, and I think that's kind of the angle that the matchup's taking.
Do you think that Saint-Denis kind of gets drawn into those striking battles a little bit too much based off his level of skills? Because I think that's something that he can't afford to do against Ismail here, because we've seen the devastating power that Bonfim has. And utilize all your tools. There's no point in turning up to an old job with a spanner and a screwdriver when you've got the power tools in the truck. You might as well bring all of those into the battle with you. And I think Saint-Denis is only kind of getting drawn into these striking battles, and sometimes it's caused them to lose fights. Sometimes it's caused him to take a lot more damage than he should have. But like you said, he's going to have to tread carefully here against Bonfim, isn't he?
He's going to have to grapple. He's just going to have to grapple. I think that one of the primary elements of the striking game that he has is that he's a raw, tough bastard. And that, unfortunately, without skill, is only going to get you so far in the UFC. But one thing it's guaranteed to get you is severe trauma. Severe trauma. And in this one, if it's look, don't get me wrong, this is MMA. He could go out there, land a right hand on Ismail Bonfim, he goes night-night, and I'm sat here with fucking egg on my face looking like an idiot. But generally, my argument will be, if Bonfim goes out and is allowed to get into a striking rhythm and doesn't have to think about the takedowns, I think he finishes Benoit Saint-Denis inside 2. If Saint-Denis leans on what we imagine his strengths to be, being the grappling, it can absolutely be a close fight. It can absolutely be an interesting, intriguing back and forth battle, but Bonfim has to make it that. And Benoit Saint-Denis has to make it that. And if he doesn't, then it's a tough out.
Sure is. It sure is. Look, we're talking about severe trauma, and that's something that Bruno Ferreira doesn't mind dishing out, because he's coming into this fight with Nursultan Ruzibov on a vicious knockout run, Harry. And we saw the fruits of his labor, I guess, against Gregory Rodriguez at UFC 283. And for Ruzibov coming in and facing a guy like this on your UFC debut, it's about as tough a test as you can imagine, isn't it?
Yeah, this guy's a destroyer, an absolute fucking destroyer. Like, we've seen Gregory Rodriguez have an absolute unbelievable war with Armen Petrosyan. We have seen him go out and look fantastic against fighters. Gregory Rodriguez is a stalwart in that division, a really, really good litmus test for guys. And when you go out and you fucking murder him in a round, again, you have my attention, sir. Let's see the things that you have. Now, for his opponent, I don't know too much about him. Ruzibov is sporting a very, 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 very large record of 34-8-2, coming in here off a good couple of wins. Let's see.
We're about to find out, as you say.
We're about to find out. Yeah.
It's very, very exciting fight. That'll kick off the main card. That is about as good as fight as you can kick off any card. I think, obviously Ruzibov is going to come in there wanting to prove that he belongs in the UFC. But Ferreira, man, I mean, he hits like a truck. And I think that they're placing Ferreira in this placement more so than Ruzibov. And it'll be interesting to see if he can keep up that knockout streak. That wraps up for the main card. Let's talk about some prelim fights, Harry. And headlining prelims is a very familiar name. We have Mr. Kevin Lee, who's coming back in here to take on Rinat Fakhretdinov. And this is another good one as well, isn't it? I mean, Kevin Lee. What's your opinions on Kevin Lee as a fighter? A guy who always spoke a big game, always spoke with great confidence. But we only saw flashes of brilliance inside the octagon from him before he got originally let go. I mean, knockouts like the one against Gregor Gillespie is one that's going to be played time and time again. He's been in there with some high-level competition as well. Hasn't always gone his way, but I don't think we're expecting another title run here in the 170-pound division from Kevin Lee. I think he's happy to be back in the UFC. He's in a good slot. He's been outspoken about having to fight in the Apex again. Not sure that's the greatest idea to speak against a promotion that just hired you back instantly. We'll see how that works out for him. But he has a big, big problem in front of him in Fakhretdinov on Saturday night, doesn't he?
This to me, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, but this to me is the UFC punishing Kevin Lee. This to me is the UFC saying, not, oh, you spoke about the Apex, whatever. But this is the UFC saying, you thought you were better than the UFC. You thought you could go out, test free agency, go and get a big contract somewhere, go and do this, go and do that. Well, here's how we welcome you back to the UFC. And here's Rinat Fakhretdinov, who was an absolute fucking animal. An absolute fucking animal. Now, what's my opinion of Kevin Lee as a fighter? I honestly think he could have challenged for a title, but just never, ever quite got it together. There was all the problems that he would publicly talk about with weight cutting. He didn't like this. He didn't like that. He wanted to try and weight cut in new and individual ways and was always struggling with his weight and this and the next thing. And so I just think that he is somebody that just never quite got to where he should have gotten to. Now, this is at 170 pounds. And so the weight cutting shouldn't be as much of an issue for Kevin Lee. But I just, when you go out, and people forget how good Gregor Gillespie was / is, depending on, what he's doing right now. But when you go out and you put a destruction on Gregor Gillespie like that, every single person should be stood up with the hairs on the back of their neck, pointing to God and saying, okay, big man, all right, cool, we see you, no problem. We see you, my friend, no problem. And okay, you go out and you get triangled by Tony Ferguson. My friend, in MMA, these things do happen. But it's the performances against the likes of Daniel Rodriguez where we should be winning this. Like, this is a fight that the level that we expect Kevin Lee to be at, that's a fight you should be winning. Right.
Would you put it down to mental hurdles from Kevin Lee, who is a guy, like I said, is very outspoken, where I hear Spencer talking about interviewing guys and it's like, they're trying to convince me or they're trying to convince themselves. And it always felt like Kevin Lee was always trying to convince himself a little bit in that he was this next big thing and everything like that, where when push came to shove, he was losing those mental battles, whether it came to the weight cut or whether it actually come to decisions inside the cage. And I mean, we're talking about a guy here that almost won the interim lightweight championship, I believe, who was very close to beating Tony Ferguson before he let that slip through his grasps as well. So it's amazing how close he got to now how far away he is from that again, and probably be as far as he ever will be from a title shot or an interim title shot or anything along those lines again. I think you spoke quite perfectly in the test that he has right now, is that, this is a real tough test. And I'm thinking Kevin Lee doesn't get the win here, to be honest. It's like be careful what you wish for, I guess, isn't it?
Well, this is kind of why I think the UFC is punishing him right now. On just to go back to your point just a second ago, like there is an element here, and I think that this is probably something we haven't spoken about enough, is the loss of Robert Follis for Kevin Lee.
100%.
Like I really think that is something that completely derails a fighter, especially a fighter like Kevin Lee, who'd built such a close relationship with that coach. You know, any fighter you talk to that has a long-standing coach or a set of long-standing training partners, those are people that you have deep, intense relationships with. Those are people that see you go through things that not many other humans would see you go through, and they aid you through those situations. And so the loss of Robert Follis for Kevin Lee, specifically in the way that the loss happened, I think is a real mental hurdle that not many of the Robert Follis camp have probably ever and will ever deal with. It's a horrific thing to happen to, obviously, Robert Follis and his family, but also the people that were so close and loved Robert Follis, and those were his fighters. So I think that there's an element there that isn't spoken about enough, and maybe Kevin would be open to talking about that after his career is finished or whatever it is. But in Rinat Fakhretdinov, and we'll just flip to him nicely, is this motherfucker is just an absolute savage. An absolute savage. He doesn't get massive finishes, not a massive power puncher, but he will drown you. And what he did to Brian Battle, who, as we know, Brian Battle is one of those guys where if you're not absolutely on your P's and Q's, especially in the grappling, he will find a way to make it really difficult. He's that guy in the gym that has a ton of sneaky, odd, weird submissions from random places that he will catch you with if you're not careful. And Fakhretdinov just went in and mauled him. And so for Kevin Lee, obviously the grappling has always been the strong suit. The striking was okay, but was shown up against the likes of Edson Barbosa, shown up against other fighters. So if we're looking at a grappling heavy performance, an expectation out of Kevin Lee, well, it's going to be a tough out, a really tough out.
Yeah, it really is. But I'm excited to see them the fight as well, you know, because if Kevin Lee can produce something, it's sure as hell going to be an interesting contest in the welterweight division. Any thoughts on the featherweight bout between Yana Santos and Cara Rosa, Harry? This could be for the lineal 145-pound title now at this stage with Amanda Nunes that has retired and left the belt vacant at this stage. Any quick thoughts?
It's happening. Dana said that he was going to close the division, and so whatever.
We're keeping it open for this fight, really? Yeah, we shall move on. Ivana Petrovic versus Luana Carolina is next in the 125-pound division. We've talked about that division already being talent-rich. Petrovic coming in here at 6-0. Very interesting to see how she gets on, if she can continue on that streak. Anderson Brito versus Weston Wilson next. Any quick thoughts on this, or shall we move on, Harry?
Fair play to both lads. Hope they make the weight cut safely.
100%. I would like to spend a little minute on Alexander Romanov and Blagoy Ivanov, excuse me. I mean, in recent times for Romanov, he's kind of fallen off the beaten track a little bit. You know, he's been tested against higher level competition. It hasn't worked out. I think this is a good matchup for him against a guy like Blagoy Ivanov, excuse me. Ivanov is one of those tough, durable guys that is not easy to get out of there. If you get a finish against Ivanov, I think you're doing well. You know, he's getting a little bit older in his career as well, of course, but like he's a good test. A guy who's coming back off a loss of Tybura himself. So both these gentlemen in the heavyweight division are looking to kind of get back into the win column here. It'll be interesting to see who gets it done. What's your overarching thoughts on this?
I'm worried for Romanov. And the reason why I say that is he showed me something that really strikes fear into me in the Alexander Volkov fight. And that was that he literally gave up. He shot for a couple of takedowns, had a little bit of success, and then when it failed, he just gave up. And if giving up is in your brain, Blagoy Ivanov is going to have success in fights. Ivanov, his primary resource is toughness. He's not a great fighter. He's just a tough bastard. And this is a perfect rebuild opportunity for Romanov to go out. He can grapple, and Ivanov won't shy away from the grappling. And so it plays into the wheelhouse of Romanov quite nicely. But does he get it done? If you'd have asked me 2 years ago, I'd say he storms Ivanov. But you asked me today, after the performance against Alexander Volkov, he has big questions to answer around his mentality. Can he do it? Sure, of course, no problem. Will he do it, though? That's the question for me.
Do you think there's a little bit more of a forgiveness per se for a heavyweight fighter that finds himself in that position like Romanov did, where he did actually quit, like he threw in the towel himself? I guess the chance to kind of save yourself for another day is more important in the heavyweight division than it would be in other divisions. And maybe he chose that because we've seen it with fighters before who have pretty much given up and bounced back in the heavyweight division. Your Arlovskis, your Overeems, everything like that. There is a chance, and there's a better chance for you to kind of get there, get a couple of wins, put yourself back into the mix, get a little bit more experience. Because, I mean, all the talk for Romanov on the way up is that, you know, he's young for a heavyweight. He's 32 now, but on his come up, we were talking to him as like a maybe 30-year-old, 31-year-old. You probably have another 8 to 10 years realistically, you know, in the heavyweight division. This is his chance to kind of come in and maybe silence those doubters against Ivanov, because, like I said, he's not going to get an easy out against this guy either. I think Ivanov is the guy that got stabbed in the chest before, I believe, isn't he? So this motherfucker out there like Jon Snow getting stabbed and coming back to life. So this is a tough test. A good kind of sneaky heavyweight fight on the undercard, Harry. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, the placement tells you a lot about the expectations for the UFC, right? This is very much a go in and show us something. Go in and show us something. If you go in and you win a unanimous decision, just a nice, you know, grappling, heavy, dominant win over Ivanov, no problem. We'll start to build you again. If he goes in and loses to Ivanov, that's 3 on the trot, and I would not expect to see Alexander Romanov back.
No. It'd be some fall from grace, wouldn't it?
Fucking would. Went from big prospect to potentially out of the UFC. I mean, that's probably harsh. They probably will bring him back because it's heavyweight, right? Whatever. But
well, if Chase Sherman can win or fucking lose 7 fights in a row, or whoever, Sam Alvey as well, like, I mean, yeah, you give someone like Romanov a chance to kind of get back and do it. But stranger things have happened, Harry. Let's talk about the final fight, or the first fight on the card. Final fight for us: Guram Kutateladze versus Elvis Brenner. A fight that fell through, got put back on, fell through, and now we see it opening up this card on Saturday night. But there could be worse fights in the lightweight division that you could open up on, Harry. And always excited to see Guram Kutateladze get in there. Elvis Brenner will be a tough enough test, but I feel that Kutateladze will be the guy who gets his hand raised in this. How do you kind of see these two guys matching up with each other? Georgian MMA riding the crest of our wave after Ilia Toporia's big win last week as well.
I'm going to go out on a limb, and I think Guram Kutateladze destroys this fella.
Yeah.
I think Kutateladze is a really good fighter. I really enjoy his style. It's vicious, it's powerful, it's athletic, but it's all done through that gorgeous core rotation style that him, Dolidze, Topuria, they all have a very similar style where everything is built from the core. There's very little swinging. There's very little fluff. There's very little fat on any of their shots. And that, to me, is really attractive to watch. I really enjoy that style. And Elvis Brenner goes out, and it's very hard to look good against Takugov. Takugov is an absolute split decision merchant, right? Makes it really difficult for fighters. He's one of those guys that's active without being active, never really quite does enough to win rounds cleanly, but is always in there, always tough. So picking up a decision win against him is a good win, but this is a big step up from somebody like Zubaira Takugov. And Guram Kutateladze is mean. He's a mean man.
And I think I feel with with Tugov, he let that fight slip away, and Elvis Brenner, like, that was a close fight. I think Brenner's not going to like curl up, and I think like Kutateladze is going to have to put him to work. Well, I think he will put him to work, and it'd be interesting to see if he can get him out of there. I think, you know, there's a finish there if he's willing to go and take it. Brenner will put up a fight. He's not going to go down easy, but yeah, it's a Kutaladze's fight to lose here, and a very, very interesting fight to get us kicked off in on Saturday night at the Apex. And that kind of wraps us up, Harry, for another preview show. I feel that this is a sneaky good card. I feel that you know, there's a lot of potential fights. There's lots of future prospects on it. What's the big story? Maybe we'll leave with your final thoughts. The big story for you coming into this card, and your overall kind of final thoughts before we wrap it up.
Very excited for the card. I think that there are, I mean, we've just talked about them for an hour and 5 minutes, but there's a ton of talking points. There's a ton of jeopardy. There's a ton of divisional movement potential. I think the big story of the card for me is rising prospects, right? Like rising stars, rising prospects. That's to me is the story of the card. I think the highlights are Ismagulov. Who is he? What is he? Does he destroy Sean Strickland? Does he not? I think the co-main event is a screamer of a fight. Ismail Bonfim, Michael Morales, all of these sorts of fighters, the Guram Kutateladzes of the world, the Michelle Gatto, Melissa Gatto, sorry. These fighters, they're the story of this card. There are a ton of B-sides with an absolute vast amount of potential going in against some A-sides to just see where we are in this UFC division. And I'm here for it. I love these sorts of cards. Great, great, great stuff.
Unbelievable stuff. We will be back on the balance breakdown on Tuesday to break down all the action as it plays out, or after it all plays out. We'll be commenting on Twitter as it plays out on Saturday night. Go and follow that man, Harry Powell, BJJ_Harry Powell on Twitter, Instagram. You can catch me, IO'Neill MMA. Thanks everybody for listening. Hit the like, subscribe button, and we'll see you all on Tuesday for the balance breakdown. Take care.